Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. Now, today, two very important events to discuss. First, there has been a series of Russian airstrikes and missile strikes against targets throughout the Ukraine. One of the more important targets struck today was a military institute in Poltava. Russia reportedly hit two targets within the vicinity of Poltava, hitting a military technical institute, possibly killing or wounding in excess of 250 Ukrainian military personnel and possibly foreign military personnel that were assigned to this locale. And we got the good old donut there. There we go. Got rid of that. Now, supposedly the personnel stationed at this military institute had received word to go to the bunker complex under the facility. However, given the nature and the speed of the Russian missile that struck the facility, the personnel at this assigned base or at this assigned building were unable to seek cover, and thus that's how so many casualties were recorded. Now, at the same time, it is now being reported that the United States may hand over to the Ukrainians the AGM-158 JASSM. So why is this missile system important for the Ukrainians? What would happen if the Ukrainians get this missile system? Well, it will place much of Western Russia within range of this munition. This weapon system has a reported range, if you're looking at the extended range variant, and we have no reason to believe that the United States would not hand over the extended range variant, even if it's the normal range variant. Many targets inside of the Russian Federation could be targeted by this weapon system. This is a very stealthy missile that has the ability to avoid radar. It was one of the missile systems that was involved in the last attack on Syria for the reported usage of chemical weapons by the Syrians. The United States retaliated or went after targets inside of Syria, and the weapon systems that were used in that attack were these low-observable JASSM missile systems. Now, this is going to cause a great escalation in this conflict. If the Ukrainians receive these weapon systems, and if the United States approves these weapon systems to be used deep inside of the Russian Federation, how are the Russians going to respond? Now, given what's happened today, I'm sure the media here in the United States will help and assist the Ukrainians in receiving this weapon system. But again, at the start of this conflict, we were talking about just the fact that Javelin anti-tank guided weapon systems, at the start of this conflict was a fairly significant contribution to the Ukrainians. It was not done lightly. And now, with the AGM-158 and possibly the extended range variants being handed over to the Ukrainians, look, this is a weapon system that is essentially one of the best systems that the United States has for standoff engagements. It really is. I mean, there's no other weapon system that the U.S. could hand over to the Ukrainians at this point that would exceed the JASSM-158 in terms of capability, low observability, and the ability to strike deep inside of Russia. Again, if we were to go at the and look back at the early stages of this conflict, I mean, it's unlikely that anyone would ever have believed that the Ukrainians would receive the AGM-158. Incredibly unlikely. I think if we were discussing the deployment of the AGM-158 to the Ukrainians at the onset of this conflict, I think most people would believe that we would be heading towards World War III. Now look, if the Ukrainians get these systems, and the Ukrainians are also creating their own subsets of systems that can reach deep inside of Russia, and you add these weapon systems that, again, is just going to continue to pull the West deeper and deeper into this conflict until the conflict expands. I mean, I've talked about this many times. We are on that pathway right now where, in all likelihood, the end game is a military conflict between the Russian Federation and the West, be it the United States, NATO, what have you. Look, NATO is a contributor. Right now, NATO forces are inside of the Ukraine, assisting the Ukrainian military. Now, this will add just another layer. And again, at what point will the Russians change strategy and expand the conflict? I would think that if we start to see these weapon systems, and if they are effective in getting through Russia's very robust air defense network around the central industrial zone, which is Moscow, and they're able to effectively strike targets near Moscow, this is going to send this war into an entirely another realm. It really is. The Ukrainians, while having the ability to strike at Russia, they don't have the low observable technology to launch these types of weapon systems, or these very weapon systems that may have the ability to penetrate the Russian air defense network within the central industrial zone. This is essentially this area around Moscow. Now look, Moscow has a great number of S-400s, even S-500s that have been deployed around Moscow. It's probably the most robust air defense in terms of being defended by air defense systems in the entire world. So I imagine the folks over at Lockheed Martin are just itching to see if the AGM-158 can penetrate Moscow's defenses around Moscow. And if they are, if the Russians have difficulty in shooting these weapon systems down, what happens then? Where does this take us? I could not imagine these types of missiles being deployed handed over to the Ukrainians, and then being used deep inside of Russia, and the Russians not escalating this conflict. I can't imagine it. Now, look, we've talked about Russian red lines, and obviously the Kursk incursion would be considered by some one of those red lines, but that's on the surface. What's happening in Kursk is very simplistic. It's really irrelevant. It's open fields, one small town, and the Russians aren't very concerned with it. Yes, it does have a bad PR look. It does indeed. The Ukrainians are using that PR optic, as is the mainstream media here in the United States. But in the grand scheme of things, it's really an ineffective operation that is taking away combat units from the Ukrainians that could be used in the Donbass offensive, or in the Ukrainians' case, the Donbass defensive operation. And the Russians are fine with that. There's not much in this area that the Russians are really concerned with. The Russians have stabilized the front. Kursk is protected. The power plant west of Kursk is protected, and the Russians have stabilized the front near the E38 highway. So they're really not concerned with it. There's no reason. The Russian perception in terms of Kursk Oblast is probably the same as it is with the Donbass. I mean, the Russians see the Donbass just as much as being part of Russia as Kursk. They really do. Now, here in the United States, that perception may be a little different, and the mainstream media is able to basically say that, hey, the Ukrainians invaded Russia. Well, maybe, but not really. Again, it's not a strategic threat to the Russian Federation, and it's probably, as I've talked about before, going to be more of a hindrance. Now, once you start lobbing AGM-158s, low observable missiles at Moscow, and you start hitting targets near Moscow, okay, this could change things in a way that most people here in the West don't understand. You can't associate what is happening with Kursk and compare and contrast that to lobbing AGM-158s at Moscow. Those are two totally different scenarios, guys. And the ramifications for what could happen, if that happens, it could affect the entire world. It really could. But we'll see what happens. The Russians continue airstrikes. Obviously, a very sensitive target was struck within the last 24 hours near Poltava. And there it is. So we'll see what happens as the U.S. weighs sending these low observable weapon systems to the Ukrainians. And that does it for today. As always, thanks for joining us. More to come. As always, have a good day.